So we've got that handled.
Okay. And it's 12:03. And how many people are on board now?
We have nine of us.
Oh, all right. Well, certainly we could wait another minute or two. Hopefully there's at least a dozen before we get started.
Jennifer, where are you?
I am in my office in Sandpoint.
Sandpoint.
Yes. Yeah, this works out well to do the Zoom thing rather than to drive back.
Yeah.
Yeah, how was your trip home?
Oh, it was easy. It was a lovely day. It was great to have Cynthia's company. So we had a great time chatting the whole way home.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
She's a very lovely woman. It was so nice to have you both at my place, and it was just, oh, well, like I said, a great opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. And this is the League of Women Voters speech program, which happens often on Wednesdays at noon. And we are fortunate to have a Zoom connection thanks to Kylie Britzman and her excellent skills. And today we are fortunate to have both Lauren and Dave as co-hosts. So my name is Zena Hartung, and a couple of quick little housekeeping items. We ask that you save your questions till the end. In the end, we'll give you plenty of time. And if on the way you have questions, you can raise your hand, and probably those will be addressed as well, because this is not very formal. We are, so raise your hands by going to the
reactions.
The reactions level. Thank you. And you'll see a place that it says to raise your hand. And as you raise your hand, you can lower it. And as you're being answered, Lauren will put you on as a featured picture along with Jen, and the conversation will continue. If, however, you'd rather put your question in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well. And Lauren will be monitoring the chat. So once again, welcome. And special welcome to Jen Jackson Quintano. She is a writer and the co-owner of Sand Creek Tree Service in Sandpoint. So last fall, after 13 years as an arborist, Jen set down her chainsaw to take up the fight for reproductive rights. She founded the Pro Voice Project, an organization harnessing the power of storytelling to promote empathy and education related to abortion and its role as an essential pillar of reproductive health care. Quintano now travels around the state for speaking engagements and abortion story stage productions, working to change the reproductive rights and conversation in Idaho. And we are very fortunate because we just had one of her events here in Moscow, and I was able to attend. Here's the program that was provided at the Kenworthy on Sunday. And we have, it was co-led, I believe, also, correct me, Jen, that Bands Off Our Bodies was one of the collaborators. So and it was very well attended. So I'm going to pass it on now to Jen Jackson Quintano, and she can tell you more about herself and her program.
All right. Thank you, Zena. And it's good to be here with you all on your lunch breaks. I appreciate you showing up for the conversation. And I'm really excited to have the conversation. That's sort of the best part of these things. So I'll speak briefly about the Pro Voice project and what I'm up to with that and sort of the origin stories of that. And then I would really love to open it up to your questions and comments, and we can go from there. As Zena said, I spent the last 13 years working as an arborist with my husband. I come to the reproductive rights fight with no special background. I come to it with the ability to be very open and vulnerable and honest about my experiences in the reproductive rights realm. And that has served me and the project well. So the Pro Voice project, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's an organization that relies upon storytelling to mobilize people to act in the reproductive rights realm. And action could be to tell their own about abortion stories, or to initiate conversation in their community about reproductive rights and reproductive health care. It can be helping people to shed a sense of stigma and shame around talking about these things and being more open with their families, their friends, their communities, starting book clubs that focus on reproductive rights as a subject. I mean, these are all little things, but they add up to change the landscape around reproductive rights and healthcare in our state. Because the thing is, we don't like to talk about this stuff. We relegate it to the shadows. It's shameful. It's not meant for public consumption. And what that does is it means that we're not fighting for these rights. The rights that remain unspoken are the ones most easily dismantled. And so that's how we lose these rights to basic healthcare. So we need to amplify our voices and tell our stories and normalize these experiences of abortion and access to reproductive health care so that we can engage in the fight to restore it. And then not just restore it, but retain it, right? If we're talking about these things, if we understand how important reproductive health care is and all of its different shades, then we're going to fight for it. So the Pro Voice project got its start as a stage production of local people's abortion stories here in Sandpoint. I put out a call last fall for people to submit their stories, and we had 15 stories sent in, mostly anonymously from community members. And those stories were put together in something akin to the vagina monologues, but focusing on abortion and reproductive health care. And we packed the house here in Sandpoint for 2 different performances at the Heartwood Center here. It was powerful. People were openly crying in the audience. People were really moved by this production. And then we followed, much as with Moscow, we followed the production with a panel discussion so we could take these stories about the myriad reasons why someone would elect to terminate a pregnancy. And then we grounded those stories in the reality of what's happening here in Idaho. So we had an attorney on the panel. We had 2 physicians on the panel. We had an activist on the panel talking about how the laws in Idaho are affecting physicians and their patients and access to care. And the audience engagement was wonderful, just as it was in Moscow. People are curious about these things. The laws are intentionally confusing and vague. And so the best thing that we can do is arm ourselves with knowledge about these laws and about what is and is not legal to pursue, and support our communities within that framework. So Sandpoint was such a success that it became apparent to me that this stage production should move around the state and be shared with other communities. And that's what's been happening. So we had the Moscow performance this last weekend, which was very well attended, well received, very well supported by the community. We had 30 different business and organizational sponsors for that, which was incredible. Last week, we had a stage performance in Boise where over 400 people attended. It was remarkable. It was so good. Each community that this is put on in has a different playwright, different performers, so that the performance really reflects the community in which it is staged. We try to collect stories from the individual communities so that we can share those back to the people listening in the crowd. I know it was really powerful in Sandpoint for the 15 people who shared their stories to sit in the audience and receive their stories. And it was cathartic for them to hear that. So even on these individual levels, that these performances have power. My personal abortion story was a part of the Boise performance. And, you know, my abortion, that was 18 years ago. And I thought I had moved through all the emotional content from that. But then receiving my story from the stage, it just brought up so much emotion. I was crying. I did not expect to be doing that, but there was this catharsis in the midst of that, and this sense of empathy for my younger self and what she went through. And that's the power of storytelling. It's about connecting across our shared humanity. It's about generating empathy. It's about generating understanding in a way that sharing facts and figures and graphs, it can't do that, in a way that the political realm can't convey, you know. And so in the aftermath of these stage performances and also speaking engagements that I've had around the state, where I share my personal stories, every single time someone approaches me afterwards and shares their story. Often it's a story they've not shared with anyone in their life, or very few people in their life. People email me after these performances and share their stories. I've already received several from Moscow and from Boise. After the Sandpoint production, people started approaching me at the grocery store with their abortion stories. I had a gentleman come up to me in the frozen food aisle and share his abortion story from Vietnam. He'd never told his children before. No one in his family knew. And he was so moved by the performance here that he felt compelled to share that story with me and then to go on and share it with his family, because the performance had created a safe space for him to do that. And I think that's a lot of the power of this storytelling movement. There's a woman from Boise who just sent in her story last night. And she said it wasn't until she was in that room and surrounded by all those people there and hearing those stories that she finally understood that it was okay to talk about her story and share her experience, that it was safe to do that. She'd never felt safe to do that before. She'd always felt so much shame about it. And so she was one of the people in the audience that raised their hand when I asked, how many of you here have had an abortion? She bravely raised her hand and then felt compelled to write to me and share her story. I see this as essential to changing the laws eventually in this state. We need to change the landscape of conversation and connection around this issue. We need to change how we talk about it. We need to create more room for discussion around this, and we need to build more empathy if we're going to create the fertile soils in which we can, you know, restore reproductive rights and then retain them. So I'm really excited to continue with this effort. I just got off the phone earlier this morning with someone in Sun Valley, Blaine County, who's interested in bringing this there. I've got work underway for a production in McCall for early next year. And I've just recently gotten emails from people in Idaho Falls, Pocatello, and Coeur d'Alene that are interested in putting it on there. So I'm really excited for this to spread around the state and change the conversation in this state. It's so important in places like Idaho that are so conservative, and we feel so fearful talking about these things, to help people to understand that there are safe spaces in which you can share these stories and they're nothing to be ashamed of. So that's some of the work I do with the Pro Voice Project. I have a bunch of other projects underway, and I'm just one person right now. I have more ideas than I have time, but I'm doing my best to change the conversation in this state, and meeting with legislators too on both sides of the aisle to try to determine what is possible moving forward, both with incremental changes to the law and hopefully ultimately with the ballot initiative campaign in several years. So I am feeling a great amount of hope. You wouldn't expect that I would, but I am feeling a great amount of hope around this issue and the fact that changes are ahead. We are going to see change in this realm, and just my connections with people throughout the state, my interactions with them, it gives me a great sense of hope. People are fired up about this issue and they're finally willing to speak up about it. So the more that I can do to encourage people to speak up, the better. So that's what I've been up to with the Pro Voice Project. And I would love to hear your questions or comments and answer what I can. I do know that Joe Ellsbury is on this as well, and you're a retired physician, so you might be able to step in and answer any questions in the medical realm that I'm ill-equipped to answer. But I would love to hear from all of you.
That's great. That's so good. I failed to mention that the first acquaintance I made with you, Jen, was at the Women's Symposium.
Yes.
Sorry, that's my dog. And the Women's Symposium had other elements. Have you made any arrangements to do more women's symposiums?
There's definitely interest in doing more. So there were 3 of us that spoke as a part of the Women's Symposium. Kaylee Peterson, who's running for Congress, and me speaking for the Pro Voice Project, and then Josie Christensen, who several years ago ran for office, and now she speaks on behalf of the National Organization for Women. We would love to do more of these. And we're also 3 people that have busy lives. So what we're trying to do is bring more people into the Women's Symposium fold, if you will, more people that are qualified to speak to these issues, so that when there is interest in a place like Boise or Idaho Falls or elsewhere, that we have more people that can answer the call, because I can only do so much traveling away from my family and my 9-year-old daughter. And as much as I would love to teleport myself to every possible Women's Symposium event, I also need to be present here in my home and my community. So it's a conversation that we're having. I'm hoping that the Women's Caucus, the Democrats, that they will help to take this on and further it, because it was really well received in the 4 communities that we put it on in. We had great crowds, great interactions. I know it really helped to raise awareness about what the Pro Voice Project is doing, and just women's issues in the state in general. So if you know of anyone that would be willing to speak at any of these or do a little bit of traveling to be a part of this, please let me know, and I can pass that on to others who are helping to organize this.
That's so great. As other people come up with questions, I'll ask a few, but feel free, everyone, to raise your hand or to put your questions into the chat. Meanwhile, the question that is a little more perhaps close to the bone is, are you hearing, as you do these Pro Voice projects, are you hearing of anyone who is needing reproductive health concerns immediately? Are there any folks showing up needing abortion at your programs?
No one that has spoken to me in the moment about needing it. I am able to direct people to several different organizations in our region that are helping in that regard. There's the Northwest Abortion Access Fund, and they do help people access abortion care out of state, and in certain situations help pay for that, pay for travel, that sort of thing, make it available to those who need it. And I also usually mention Idaho Abortion Rights, and they're based out of Boise, and they're helping with myriad things, including sex education, which is an important piece of this, right? Because the schools aren't doing it. So it's nice to have volunteer or nonprofit organizations filling that gap. They also provide pregnancy tests and condoms and STD tests and so much of that, and also support for people seeking abortion care elsewhere, and they do help cover costs for that. So I tend to mention those organizations as resources for people who are in need of that service. But no one has come to me specifically, and I imagine it's easier to take a brochure or a pamphlet about Northwest Abortion Access Fund than it is to tell a stranger, about the situation that you're in. I will say it's important to remember that these laws don't just affect pregnant women, pregnant people. It affects women across all stages of life. And so one of the stories I recently received was from here in Sandpoint, a woman who's in her 60s and has had some symptoms come up that could indicate perhaps ovarian cancer or something like that, but her gynecologist is no longer here. The gynecologist that she'd been seeing for so many years was a part of the exodus of physicians that we saw up here in Bonner County. So now this woman is having to travel elsewhere, see new physicians, be in places that aren't comfortable or familiar to figure out what's going on for her. And so there are these ripple effects. These laws are ostensibly about women who need abortion care, but then it affects all pregnant women, even women who want their babies. And then it affects all women, even those beyond childbearing age, because we're seeing so many physicians leave. So important.
About that, yes, Jennifer, what do you know about the exodus of our, workers, everyone from doctors to midwives? What's going on statewide?
Yeah, it's many people have left. So all 4 of our OBGYNs up here in Bonner County left, and they all moved out of state. It wasn't that they just left because Bonner General closed labor and delivery. They left the state because they felt like it was not safe for them to practice here anymore. One of those OBs, her husband worked in the emergency department, so he's gone now too. So a lot of times you have physicians that are married to one another, so one leaves and you lose another piece of the puzzle in your community. We've lost 5 of our MFMs who deal with like high risk pregnancy and pregnancy complications. They're all down in Boise. That left us with just 4 for the whole state. I think one person recently was brought in to help fill the gap, but still we were already underserved in this realm, and then to lose all these physicians, it's a lot. I actually called the Idaho Medical Association several months ago to try to get a bead on exactly how many physicians have left, and it's hard to track. The IMA didn't even know exactly what the numbers were, and we definitely don't know the numbers of, okay, well, this many OBGYNs have left. And last I checked, it was somewhere around 13 or 15, but who's leaving? Like I've heard that there was a physical therapist in Coeur d'Alene who's left, because he doesn't feel comfortable raising his family there, or a dentist who was married to an OB. We don't know those other numbers of people leaving, other kinds of care providers leaving that aren't specifically in the reproductive care realm. But it's a lot, and it's disturbing, and we might see more hospitals close labor and delivery, or if nothing else, it's just going to be really hard for those who remain. Who do they refer people to? Their networks of support are getting much smaller, and that diminishes the level of care that patients receive.
It's also, as you say, the ripple effect is ongoing and affecting the training of new doctors. I know we have the WWAMI program here in Moscow, and I have heard by the pipeline, of course, that nobody directly has told me that there is a gap now in the training for doctors who need to know the obstetric steps for abortion.
Yeah.
And so that's very, very troubling.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories coming out about people not wanting to do their residencies in Idaho, new physicians not wanting to move here, because if you have the option of working in Oregon, where you cannot be punished for the kind of evidence-based care that you provide, or coming to Idaho, where every pregnant person that comes through the door, you're wondering, can I help this person? If I do help this person, is that a criminal act? Can I, what's going to happen? People are going to go to those states where they can practice evidence-based care. I've spoken to several medical students who grew up in Sandpoint and had dreamed of coming back here to work, and they've decided not to do that, that they will practice elsewhere.
Jen, this is Laura, and I have a question. Have you made any progress, or have you heard of any progress with legislators in changing the law and in changing attitudes among the people who make the laws?
Yeah, I think the next legislative session is just going to be ugly. Hopefully we can do some house cleaning in 2024 where some of the more extreme voices will not be a part of this debate. I think there will be a concerted effort the next legislative session to at least create some more exceptions to make it a little bit easier for physicians to practice here. And there will be some lobbying campaigns on behalf of physicians to try to make that happen. I think it's a good first step, incremental change. I wish I could snap my fingers and have everything be fixed overnight. But the more that we can do to make it easier for our physicians to practice, the more likely we are to hang on to some of those physicians. It's still going to be really hard to recruit here, but we don't want to, I was going to say hemorrhage, to use a medical word. We don't want to hemorrhage any more care providers in this state. So I think that's probably going to be the plan, is to try to make just some incremental progress with some more exceptions added. But it's just a Band-Aid approach. And there are so many reasons why someone would need to terminate a pregnancy, just medically speaking. You can't make an exception for each of those. It's just impossible. So while I appreciate any changes to the law that will even help just a single person, it's not the answer. But I do know, speaking with our legislators from up here in North Idaho, they understand that this is an issue that is very important to their constituents up here because we lost our labor and delivery department. So even though they may consider themselves pro-life, they also understand that the laws need to be tweaked to help support having healthcare providers here in our community, and they are willing to do that. And I heard from two of our representatives up here that when they supported our trigger law, several years ago, they didn't think Roe was going to be overturned. They didn't think it was ever going to matter. And B, they had no idea of the ripple effect of these laws. They just thought they were protecting unborn babies. Full stop. That was it. That's as far as they thought about it. So this has been a really eye-opening experience for them to see, this whole ward shut down at the hospital, to see women not be able to birth their babies here, to have to travel many, many miles, to have a lower level of care. So I think their eyes are opened to this now, and I think there's a desire to vote accordingly. It's just helpful to have those more extreme elements out of the legislature. So there's not the fear of losing one seat and getting replaced by an extremist if you're more of a moderate. So
Thanks.
That's a very good
I'm not seeing any other hands raised. I just want to encourage the others who are here with us, if you do have a question or whatever questions you have, to raise your virtual hand or to type your question into the chat.
Jen. So a question that comes to me is, what else does it bring up when you have discussions after the Pro-Voice Project stories? Are there other civil rights organizations, LGBTQ, people who see the issue of reproductive rights on a larger scale? What do you know of that?
Well, I will say the ACLU of Idaho They helped, they sponsored the Pro Voice event down in Boise, which was great. They're definitely allies in this. And the ACLU nationally is very much involved in helping to fund ballot initiative campaigns on reproductive rights. So it's nice to have them as an ally. And then the LGBTQ community, they're amazing allies in this because it's the same forces that are pushing against their rights. It's all intertwined, you know. And so the Pro Voice Project partnered with Sandpoint Pride this year. And the theme was liberation for every body, you know, so that can cover reproductive rights, but it can also cover gender affirming care. And there have been other LGBTQ organizations in North Idaho that have stepped up to support stage productions and just wanting to share resources. So we have a lot of natural allies out there because we're all kind of storming the same hill. And when one of us wins, we all win, you know? So I think it behooves us to all work together and see that we have a lot of common ground on this.
Excellent. That's so true. On a more personal note, you know, how has this effort affected your own home life and your business?
Yeah, that's a big question. Surprisingly, with the business, I was concerned about how this would affect our business, especially here in Sandpoint. And surprisingly, we're getting a lot of clients now who call and say, I called you guys because I appreciate what Jen is doing in our community. So it's been really encouraging to hear that. And I would not say that our call numbers haven't seemed to drop this year. So anyone who's not calling us because of my political activism, it's more than made up for by the people who are appreciative of someone speaking out in our community, because it often doesn't feel safe to do that here. So I think people are happy to say thank you from the sidelines. We'll see if that changes in the months and years to come. It was interesting. I met with Jim Woodward yesterday. He's the one that lost to Scott Herndon up here last year. And he's a wonderful man and, moderate Republican. I really appreciate him. And I really hope that he prevails next year. And he was asking a similar question, like, what kind of blowback have I gotten? And it's been very minimal, which I'm really surprised about. I keep thinking, oh, this is the thing that's going to bring down the shitstorm, excuse the expression. And it hasn't happened yet, even though there's been a lot of national media coverage about what's happening in Sandpoint and what I'm doing as a part of this. You know, I've been on PBS NewsHour, I've been in The Guardian, I've been on the Today Show website, like all this media, and people haven't been pushing back or targeting me. But, you know, Jim Woodward, he says, you know, I haven't seen a lot of information about your group in the community. He said, I know you exist and I know it's out there, but I haven't known a lot about the Pro Voice Project. And he said, maybe it's just because Republicans or people more on the right haven't heard enough yet. So that's a sign to me that I need to do more outreach to across the aisle. It's a lot of times the usual suspects that show up at my events. And so what is it that I can do to expand my reach in these communities? So something to ponder, but I thought for sure that things would get kind of ugly at this point with the kind of media coverage I've gotten and all the events that I've done, and not bad yet.
Well, I know that Sunday there was a training for a security unit out in front of the Kenworthy, and it looked like everything was quiet there.
Yeah, so that's one thing that we do ahead of our stage productions is I like to have peacekeepers present at our events. And so there are several people here in Sandpoint that are willing to travel a bit and offer those peacekeeping trainings. And it's really just about de-escalation practices. You know, if things get really bad, you call the police, but there are ways to de-escalate and help someone back down from their, elevated voices and vitriol and that sort of thing. And so if nothing else, it's been helpful for the people attending these events to know that there is a presence there, right? It's helpful to see those people in orange vests and walkie-talkies, just to know that their safety is covered if need be. And there haven't been any protesters at any of the 3 stage productions I've put on so far. So that's encouraging.
Well, it was particularly encouraging here in Moscow that we didn't, because we do have some very strong evangelical groups, and yet everything was quiet. What's that, Lauren?
We do have a question in the chat, so I'll read it to you, Jen. This is from Abby. Have you considered reaching out to Idaho churches? I bet if you foster relationships with pastors and leadership, some churches may be open to hosting a performance.
And that is a great question. And that's definitely something on my radar. So the Universalist Unitarian Church, of course, is a major supporter of this work. And the congregation in Boise was intimately involved with that event. It was actually the Reverend Sarah Lawal, who was the playwright down there, which was wonderful to work with her on that. And of course, in Moscow, Elizabeth Stevens was involved as well. And I've had other churches step forward to support these stage productions. So I think for the 2 that happened this last week, there were 3 different congregations that supported each of those events, which is nice to see. There's someone involved with the Methodist Church here in Sandpoint that just reached out wanting to support what the Pro Voice Project is doing. And people from the Presbyterian Church here are also interested in getting involved. So I think there is an opportunity to reach out to faith communities and have these conversations. And I would love to explore that more. I would also love to have some kind of interfaith conversation around this too. That's on my dream list, where we could have different denominations represented and just have a discussion about, their beliefs around this and how they support congregants, and just, have a more nuanced conversation about this rather than that's a sin. I think there's a lot of opportunity around that.
Very good.
Response was, oh, yay, that's great to hear. Thank you. I don't see other questions yet. Audience, please raise your hand or put a question in the chat.
One thing I can tell you about that I'm planning, I actually just had a meeting about this right before this call, that I'm hoping will pull in people from across the political spectrum here in Sandpoint, is I'm putting together a multimedia exhibit called Birthing in Bonner County, Past, Present, and Future. And so it's an educational exhibit. It's not political. It tells the story of this upward trending arc of care that we saw here for women and children over the years as Sandpoint grew. And then the precipitous cliff that we fell off this year when we lost our labor and delivery department. And then there's an opportunity for the hospital here to tell their story about what they hope for the future on how they will rebuild this. And the plan is to have a display up at a local coffee shop here, and I'm partnering with the museum on this. They're helping with research, and we'll have this display put up, sort of a timeline around the coffee shop that people can see the various levels of care that were offered over the years through photographs and newspaper articles and artifacts and that sort of thing. The local radio station here has offered to help produce a 3-part radio program series about this, about the past, the present, and future of care here. And then a local videographer is also willing to help create a film component of this. And I think it's an opportunity to have a community-wide conversation around this that is nonpartisan, because we all care about having these healthcare options available here. And we can all see that there was an evolution of care here that was abruptly cut off this year. And so I'm excited about the potential for who else this project might reach in the community and the kinds of conversations it might help us have moving forward about how we restore that care here.
That sounds wonderful, Jen. And it reminds me of the Pro Voice Project presentations here at the Kenworthy on Sunday, where there were several stories that were prefaced by, I had my abortion in the 1970s when it was safe. And because of that, I've been able to go on with my life. And that, of course, now in our present day is not available. And just to get that through line that things could be different. Women today facing decisions could be making them just with their physician and not with, the senator sitting in the room.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great point. And now it's not even just about the decision to carry or terminate a pregnancy. It's just basic care. You need a pelvic exam, you need an ultrasound, you need whatever. That's not even an option here anymore. But you do bring up a good point about those, the stories that women have shared and how making that decision shapes people's futures. And, I'm very open about my story where I was 25 and engaged to a man who was 22 years my senior. And he liked to control everything about me in our relationship, except for he didn't really like birth control. That wasn't big on his list. I ended up getting pregnant, and the thought of how much different my life would be if I had had to carry his child. I mean, my life was so small when I was with him. Everything was controlled. And what kind of, depression might I have slid into having to raise a child with him? What would that life have been like for that child, and being in an abusive household with a very unhappy mother? Would I have left? I certainly wouldn't have left as early as I did. And I just look at my life right now and I feel so blessed. And it's a life that I have authored. Like no one else has authored this for me. I have an amazing husband that is fully supportive of this endeavor, this path that I'm on, even though I'm not making any money, I'm not funded yet. I pulled back from our business that we have always run together. He supports me. How wonderful is that? I have a daughter who's turning 9 and she's just the greatest thing ever. I've been able to build this business that supports us and has bought us a house and built our future. I feel so fortunate that those doors have been open to me, and they would not have been open to me, or they would have been much harder to open had I had a child with my my ex-husband.
And that story is emblematic of the wonderful crusade that you have been working on and so successful at. And it's so inspiring, really, Jen, to hear from you, to watch the speeches happen with the Pro Voice Project. It's been a great beacon of light, and I so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jen?
Oh yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering if you could give us an encapsulation of the history of abortion in the U.S. I don't know if you know that history and can share it, because I think it would be instructive to see what the changes through time have been.
Yeah. Joe, is that something that you feel well versed in or can speak to?
You have to unmute.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to find the right button. I had it on mute because my dog was barking. I wouldn't say I'm well versed in it. I guess back in the 1700s and early 1800s, Ben Franklin had recipes for mixtures of herbs to produce an abortion in his writings. It was commonly known. It was usually handled between a woman and her midwife. We didn't have formal doctor training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can't tell you exactly when abortion began to be outlawed. basically in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a growing recognition that women were dying as a result of back alley abortions in fairly large numbers. And so when Roe v. Wade finally went to court, and when many states legalized abortion, the primary focus was to eliminate unsafe abortions. Medication abortion was not an option at that point in time. So abortions usually involved physical instrumentation in the uterus, which has a fairly high risk in untrained hands of perforating the uterus and causing severe bleeding. Then, from my personal perspective, the Republicans made a deal with the devil to get votes from evangelicals, and used abortion as a very emotional calling card to make that happen. And I think in many states there were draconian abortion laws passed for the purpose of looking good to one's constituents without any expectation that they would ever actually come into play.
Right.
And now they have.
Yeah.
Idaho actually has 6 different abortion-related statutes on the books, passed at different times with slightly different definitions of abortion and slightly different exceptions and different penalties. I actually listened to a webinar put on by Holland and Hart, which is a big law firm down in Boise, an hour-long webinar analyzing the current status of all of those different regulations and how they work together. And under different scenarios as a physician, what's the likelihood of you being prosecuted and what penalties are you up against under how all these different statutes apply to any given situation. And at least half the time the answer was, well, we don't really know. This statute was passed later than that statute, so if somebody took you to court, we don't know what the court would say about whether the exception in this statute actually applies to your situation or whether, because it's not an exception in the other statute, you'd still be prosecuted. Because of the fact that medication abortion is now available, I think the number of bloody deaths that we will see because of outlawing abortion is lower than it used to be, because you can get bootleg pills instead of trying to do it yourself with a coat hanger. But I think we will also see a significant increase in unwanted pregnancies and child poverty and domestic violence that are common results of that situation.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. And so far, we haven't seen any issues with the availability of abortion medication. Like, there's a concern that when you sort of drive it back channel, that, you know, that abortion pill could actually be something, you know, and that hasn't happened yet, but there is the possibility that if you're looking, you know, online for abortion pills, that you're going to find someone who is not reputable and sends you something else. So there's a concern around that, but it hasn't come to fruition. One thing, I have a book here talking about the history of abortion in this country, the Abortion Handbook. This was given to me by a woman here in Sandpoint who worked for an organization in San Francisco in the 60s that helped women access abortions in Mexico and helped to care for them afterwards. But the Abortion Handbook is a really fascinating read, and it does start out with sort of the global history of abortion and how different religions treated the idea of abortion, and you know, what the path that was taken here in the States. And I think you can find it online. It's an older book, but it's really interesting. And then it also gives tips and tricks for women managing their own abortions back in the 60s. Another good resource is a documentary film that was made in 1992 called When Abortion Was Illegal. Dorothy Federman is the woman who made that film, and it's available for free online through the Concentric Media website. But it's a short documentary. I think she was nominated for an Academy Award for that, but it's a really compelling film to watch, and it really stands, you know, it still is worth viewing. It stands the test of time. And she actually reached out to me. The only reason I know this film exists is Dorothy heard about the Pro Voice Project somehow and reached out to me and let me know that if I wanted to use any of her interview footage from that film, because she interviewed a number of women who'd had abortions pre-Roe and had really terrible experiences, that I could use some of her old footage to create a newer film to highlight what life is like without abortion access. So, but checking out that film is well worth it. And it does get into the history of abortion access in the US.
Can you say the name of the film again?
When Abortion Was Illegal.
Okay, thanks.
Jen, this has been fantastic. It's so good to have this Zoom meeting. It's been great to have the Pro Voice Project here at the Kenworthy on Sunday. And of course, the Women's Symposium as well. And we want to continue to follow all of the programs and possibilities for bringing out this information out of Sandpoint down to Moscow. All right, can we do that?
I would love to come down again. I would love to help organize any events or be a part of them. Just know that I'm very committed to the Moscow community. I mean, you all are amazing. I love how many people are involved and engaged in this issue in Moscow. It's just incredible. I love the university presence. I'm happy to come down anytime. So you just let me.
So good. It's been just great. Well, we're just about out of time. And if there's any last final questions, I see a heart on Anne's presence. So thank you, Anne. And so, well, again, Jen, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Moscow, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. This was so enjoyable. And Joe, thanks for stepping in when I put you on the spot. But I appreciate you all. This has been a really fun conversation.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks. Bye
Jen,
now.
could you stay on for a second after we close?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So folks are leaving. So this is Lauren again. I just want to say, if you do come in this area and need an older actor, I would love to participate.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
I've got lots of acting experience, and I really believe in what you're doing. So,
Oh, well, thank you. That's wonderful
yeah.
to know. Great.
All right. Okay.
It is.
Thanks.
It is. And of course, you're always welcome back to our guest bedroom. So.
Well, thank you. It was so comfortable. It was a wonderful place to land. I really appreciated it.
Good, good. And I was hoping to see Cynthia today, but I guess her schedule didn't permit. Or
yeah, actually, so I had this meeting, this grant committee meeting before this, and she needed to be present for that. So I already pulled her away from one other commitment this morning. So I kind of set her free to go to choir practice and not have to spend 2+ hours in my office.
All right. All right. Well, I see that Renee is still with us. Renee, did you have anything you wanted to say? Oh, we got a thank you from Renee McGee. She's a regular and a very active member of our Moscow community. Thank you, Renee. Well.
Okay, Zena, it's up to you to officially end the meeting if you're going to do that. And,
okay, well, I will end the meeting and we should stop the video then, right?
As soon as you end the meeting.
Okay.
And do you post the video online, or what do you do with the video footage?
We do.
Yes.
Okay.
It will be available. Yes.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll be on our Facebook page and our website, I think.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to stop the recording now.
Good.
Okay.
And do I